What would you do if your own family told you there wasn't enough space for you at their annual retreat, while secretly inviting 118 other people? I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, and for 3 years running, I've received the same crushing text message. Sorry honey, keeping it small this year. Family only. Maybe next time. But when I discovered the truth, when I saw that guest list, when I realized they'd rented extra properties to accommodate everyone except me, I made a decision that would change everything. What happened next shocked even my own family. And if you've ever felt like the forgotten child, the family disappointment, or the one who just never quite measures up, you're going to want to hear how this story ends. I used to believe that family was everything. That blood was thicker than water. That no matter what happened, your family would always make room for you at their table. My grandparents, Margaret and James Mitchell, raised me with those values. They built our family tradition around Lake Tahoe 40 years ago, purchasing a sprawling property where every summer we'd gather for 2 weeks of pure magic. I can still remember being 7 years old, racing down to the private dock with my 5 siblings every morning. The sound of our laughter echoing across the crystal clear water. My oldest brother David would organize treasure hunts through the 10-acre property. My sisters Emma and Rachel would help Grandma Margaret prepare enormous family feasts in the rustic kitchen. The twins, Michael and Matthew, were always climbing the tallest pines, and my youngest sister Claire was Grandpa James's shadow, following him everywhere as he tended to the gardens. But it was me that Grandpa James would take on those special artist walks around the property. He'd noticed my love for drawing before anyone else did. You see the world differently, Sarah, he'd tell me as I sketched the mountains reflected in the lake. You have a gift. He'd set up a small easel for me on the wraparound porch, and sometimes he'd sit silently beside me for hours as I painted, offering gentle encouragement. Your art will take you places, Grandpa would say. Don't let anyone tell you it's not a worthy path. When I announced my decision to attend art school instead of the business program my parents had selected, Grandpa and Grandma were my only supporters. My father, Robert Mitchell, CEO of a regional construction company, made no effort to hide his disappointment. Artists don't pay mortgages, he declared at dinner. My mother, Linda, always his echo, nodded in agreement. The summer after my sophomore year of college, both grandparents passed away within months of each other. Their absence left a gaping hole in our family, but they'd made certain their beloved Lake Tahoe property would continue bringing us together. They left it jointly to my parents with a handwritten letter expressing their wish that the annual family gatherings continue, and continue they did, though the atmosphere changed completely. My parents took over organizing the retreats, turning what had been casual, joy-filled gatherings into increasingly formal showcase events. Guest lists expanded beyond immediate family to include my father's business associates and my mother's social circle. What was once a place of authentic connection became a networking opportunity. Despite my parents' disapproval of my career choice, I worked tirelessly through art school. I took on freelance graphic design projects while my classmates partied. By graduation, I already had an impressive portfolio and client list. Today, I run my own successful design studio with clients ranging from tech startups to established luxury brands, but my professional achievements never seemed to register with my parents. The first year I was excluded from the retreat was 3 years ago. The text came 2 weeks before the event. Honey, we're keeping it small this year. Just immediate family. Not enough space. Maybe next summer. I was hurt, but I made excuses for them in my mind. Maybe they really were scaling back. Maybe they needed family bonding with just my siblings. I told myself it didn't matter, though I cried myself to sleep that night. The truth emerged through social media. Photos of not just my siblings, but extended family, family friends, and business associates. Nearly 60 people in total. When I casually mentioned seeing the photos to my sister Emma, she became defensive. Mom and Dad just thought you'd be busy with work. You're always so busy. Each of my siblings has their own relationship with our parents. David, the oldest at 38, followed Dad into construction and lives just 3 blocks from our parents with his wife and 3 children. He's the golden child who can do no wrong. Emma, 36, married a surgeon and is the perfect corporate wife, just like our mother. The twins, Michael and Matthew, 34, both became lawyers at Dad's urging and work for the same prestigious firm. Rachel, 30, is a pediatrician married to another doctor, a respectable profession in my parents' eyes. And Claire, the baby at 28, is a teacher who married her college sweetheart, a financial advisor. Then there's me. Single at 32. No children. Running a creative business instead of having a real job, as my father calls it. The black sheep. The disappointment. For 2 consecutive years, the pattern repeated. Each time, the "not enough space" text arrived. Each time, social media revealed the lie. I maintained a facade of indifference, focusing on my growing business. and trying to convince myself that it didn't hurt, but this year was different. I wasn't prepared for what I discovered. What I found next would expose the depth of their deception, and force me to make a choice that would change everything. While idly scrolling through Instagram one evening in early June, my brother Michael had posted a photo of a printed guest itinerary for the upcoming retreat. Getting excited for the biggest family gathering yet, read the caption. I zoomed in on the paper, and there it was. A detailed schedule for activities, divided into groups. And at the top, 118 confirmed guests. 118 people. And somehow, still not enough space for one more. My hand trembled as I stared at Michael's post. I counted the names I could make out on the blurry image. All 5 of my siblings. Their spouses. Their children. I spotted cousins I hadn't seen in years. My mother's sister and her entire family. Even my father's former college roommate and his wife, everyone but me. I immediately texted Michael. Retreat looks amazing. Huge group this year. His response came quickly. Yeah, gonna be epic. Mom and Dad went all out. I forced myself to sound casual. Wow, 118 people. Must be using every inch of the property. How do you know the exact number? He asked. Dad's been stressing about accommodating everyone. Had to rent 2 neighboring properties to handle the overflow. My stomach dropped. They'd rented additional properties. The not enough space excuse crumbled completely. I set my phone down and walked to my apartment window, staring out at the San Francisco skyline as tears streamed down my face. It wasn't about space. It never had been. The physical reaction was immediate. My chest tightened. My breathing became shallow. I slid down against the wall until I was sitting on the floor, hugging my knees. For nearly an hour, I couldn't move, replaying years of subtle exclusions and dismissals, the time my art won a national competition and my parents skipped the ceremony for one of the twins' baseball games. The Christmas when everyone received thoughtful gifts while I got a generic gift card. The family photos where I was positioned at the edge, easily cropped out. When I could finally move again, I called my best friend Grace. We'd met in art school and had been each other's support system ever since. They did it again, I said, my voice breaking. The retreat? Grace's voice was soft with understanding. 118 people, Grace. They rented extra properties to fit everyone. That's beyond hurtful. That's deliberately cruel. Am I overreacting? Maybe there's a reason. Stop, Grace interrupted firmly. This isn't about space, and you know it. This is about control and punishment. They're punishing you for living a life they didn't choose. Deep down, I knew she was right. My parents had never forgiven me for choosing art over business, for building a life that didn't align with their vision. But acknowledging the truth didn't lessen the pain. That night, memories of previous family gatherings flooded back. The Thanksgiving when my father introduced all my siblings' professional accomplishments but described me simply as still doing her art thing. The Mother's Day brunch where my mother gushed about wanting more grandchildren, then looked at me and said, "Of course, you need to find a husband first." Always the subtle digs. The little reminders that I wasn't quite meeting expectations. Sleep eluded me. I tossed and turned, replaying conversations and imagining confrontations that would never happen. Around 3 a.m, I called Emma, knowing she'd be up feeding her newborn. "Do you know I wasn't invited to Tahoe?" I asked without preamble. A pause. "Mom mentioned you were busy with work. Did you question that? Did anyone ask me if I was busy?" "Amber, you know how it is. Mom and Dad handle the invitations. They invited over 100 people, Emma. They rented extra properties." Another, longer pause. "Look, you know they don't really understand your lifestyle. Maybe if you made more effort to connect with them." "My lifestyle? You mean my successful business? My award-winning work? The fact that I support myself doing something I love?" "That's not what I meant," she backpedaled. "It's just, you're different. You always have been. Different doesn't mean I deserve to be excluded from my own family." "Maybe call Mom tomorrow," Emma suggested weakly. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." I hung up without responding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. And I had been allowing it to continue. Morning came after a sleepless night, and with it, clarity. The sun streamed through my window, illuminating the awards and framed client testimonials on my wall. I'd built something meaningful on my own terms. I'd honored my grandparents' belief in me. And I'd been seeking approval from people who would never give it. An idea began to form. Not of confrontation or pleading for inclusion, but of something entirely different. If my family couldn't make space for me, perhaps it was time to create my own space. On my own terms. My first instinct was pure rage. To call my parents and finally unleash years of hurt. To post the truth on social media for our entire extended family to see. To show up uninvited at Lake Tahoe and force a confrontation. But as I sipped my morning coffee, staring at the photo of my grandparents on my desk. I knew those reactions wouldn't honor who I was or what they had taught me. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. My grandmother used to say, quoting Maya Angelou. My parents had shown me repeatedly where I stood. No amount of confrontation would change that fundamental truth. Instead of letting anger consume me, I called Diane, my former professor turned mentor in the design industry. Over video chat, I poured out the whole story, my voice occasionally breaking. I just don't know what to do with these feelings, I concluded. Diane adjusted her iconic red glasses and leaned closer to the camera. You're a creator, Sarah. When faced with destruction, creators build. When faced with exclusion, they include. When faced with pettiness, they respond with magnitude. What exactly are you suggesting? If I were you, she said with a small smile, I'd channel this energy into creating something magnificent. Something that would make your grandparents proud and remind you of your own worth. After our call, I found myself researching luxury properties around Lake Tahoe. If my family could rent additional properties, why couldn't I? I wasn't trying to compete exactly, but the idea of creating my own retreat, my own tradition, suddenly felt empowering. That's when I stumbled upon it. Emerald Bay Estate. A stunning property just 15 minutes from my family's place. 6 bedrooms, panoramic lake views, private beach access, and notably, currently available for the exact week of the family retreat. The rental price made me wince, but I had been saving for a down payment on a condo. This felt more important. The next day, I had lunch with my client Rachel, who owned a successful event planning business. I designed her brand identity and website the previous year, and we'd become friends in the process. You're really going to do this? She asked after I outlined my idea. Create an entire alternative retreat. Not just any retreat, I explained, my excitement building. A creative minds retreat. I could invite friends, clients, fellow designers, people who appreciate creative work. We could have workshops, outdoor activities, amazing food. Everything my grandparents' retreats used to have before they became my parents' networking events. Rachel's eyes lit up. I love it. And I want to help. This is literally what I do for a living. We spent the afternoon brainstorming. Rachel suggested local chefs she'd worked with who could create gourmet meals. I thought of artists and designers who could lead workshops. We mapped out potential activities: sunset yoga on the deck, boat tours of the lake, hiking expeditions, evening bonfires with music and stories. You'll need a website and social media presence, Rachel said. Make it look professional. Exclusive, even. I can handle that part, I smiled, already envisioning the design. Over the next week, I secured 2 weeks of vacation time from my studio. Transferred a significant portion of my savings to cover the initial deposit on the property, and created a stunning digital invitation. The invite list took careful consideration. Grace was first, of course. Then other close friends from art school and the design world. Clients who had become friends over the years. My roommate from college and her husband. After some deliberation, I also decided to invite Rachel and David, my 2 siblings who had occasionally shown support for my career and who might appreciate the olive branch. With each name I added, my excitement grew. These were people who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they wanted me to be. People who celebrated my successes rather than diminishing them. People who made space for me in their lives. I built a website for the retreat, complete with stunning imagery of the property, detailed descriptions of the planned activities, and professional biographies of the workshop leaders I'd secured. I created private social media accounts that attendees could follow for updates. Everything was designed with the attention to detail and aesthetic sensibility that had built my reputation in the industry. Of course, doubts crept in during quiet moments. What if no one came? What if the people I invited saw it as a sad attempt to create a substitute family? What if the whole thing was a financial disaster that left me broke and embarrassed? But each time these thoughts surfaced, I reminded myself of what was at stake. My self-respect. My agency. My refusal to continue accepting exclusion as my due. I couldn't control my family's actions, but I could control my response to them. And I chose to respond by creating something beautiful. The response to my invitations was about to exceed every expectation I had, and my family was about to discover exactly what they'd been missing. 2 weeks after Michael's revealing Instagram post, I had confirmed 22 guests for my Creative Minds retreat, scheduled for the exact same week as my family's gathering. Rachel had accepted with enthusiasm, writing, "This sounds amazing, Sarah. So much more my speed than the formal family thing." David had declined with a kind note explaining that he couldn't miss the family event with his kids involved, but he appreciated the invitation. As I finalized the details, I felt something I hadn't experienced in relation to my family for years. Not anger or hurt, but a calm sense of purpose. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their exclusion. I was creating my own inclusion. Securing the Emerald Bay estate turned out to be just the first step in a process more complex than I'd anticipated. The property was magnificent, a modern architectural masterpiece with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Tahoe's azure waters, a gourmet kitchen that would make any chef envious, expansive outdoor living spaces, and even a private dock with 2 boats available for use. But turning this stunning space into the retreat I envisioned required attention to countless details. Rachel became my co-conspirator, leveraging her event planning connections to secure services at friend rates. Together, we contracted a local catering company specializing in farm-to-table cuisine, arranged for daily housekeeping, and even hired a professional photographer to document the experience. "People should see what you're creating," Rachel insisted. "Not just your family, but everyone who's ever been made to feel not enough." Each day after finishing my client work, I'd spend evenings planning workshop materials and coordinating with the artists and designers I'd invited to lead sessions. Miranda, a celebrated ceramicist, would guide a pottery workshop on the property's back patio. Troy, a nature photographer, would lead early morning photo expeditions. Grace would conduct a session on creative journaling. I wanted the retreat to embody everything my grandparents had valued: creativity, connection, joy, and authenticity. I remembered how Grandpa James would organize stargazing nights on the dock, telling stories about constellations as we huddled under blankets. How Grandma Margaret would arrange wildflowers from the property in mason jars placed throughout the house. These weren't expensive gestures, but they were thoughtful ones that made everyone feel special. The financial strain began to mount as deposits came due. I took on additional client projects, working late into the night to ensure I could fund the retreat without completely depleting my savings. There were moments when I questioned my decision. Was I taking this too far? Was I overreacting to years of exclusion by pouring thousands of dollars into what might seem like a petty response? But then I'd receive an excited message from one of my invited guests expressing how much they were looking forward to the retreat, and my resolve would strengthen. This wasn't about spite. It was about creating joy where there had been hurt. 1 week before the retreat, disaster struck. The catering company called to inform me that they had double booked and could no longer service our event. I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by welcome basket supplies I'd been assembling, fighting back tears of frustration. "I can't believe this is happening," I told Grace over the phone. "What am I going to do? 22 people expecting gourmet meals for 5 days, and suddenly no chef." "Breathe," Grace said calmly. "This is fixable. Let me make some calls." Within hours, Grace had connected me with Sophia, a personal chef who had trained at the Culinary Institute of America. She was between jobs and available for the entire week. After reviewing the menus I'd planned, Sophia suggested refinements that would actually improve the dining experience. What had seemed like a disaster had turned into an unexpected upgrade. The day before guests were set to arrive, I drove up to Lake Tahoe with my car packed to the brim with supplies. As I pulled into the circular driveway of Emerald Bay Estate, the afternoon sun illuminated the property in golden light. For a moment, I sat in my car, overwhelmed by what I'd accomplished and what lay ahead. The property manager gave me a tour, explaining the features of the house and handing over the keys. When he left, I stood alone in the great room, gazing out at the lake through the enormous windows. This space was mine, at least for the next week. And I had the power to fill it with whatever energy I chose. I spent the afternoon preparing welcome baskets for each guest. Into large market baskets, I placed locally made soaps, small bottles of California wine, artisan chocolates, custom journals with the retreat logo I designed, and handwritten notes thanking each person for being part of my life. For Rachel's basket, I added a photo I'd found of the 2 of us as children, painting together on Grandpa's porch. As I arranged the baskets in each bedroom, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Hope you're enjoying your summer, honey. Anything special planned for next week?" The text confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't even noticed that I was aware of being excluded. They expected me to remain ignorant, to accept the lies without question. Instead of responding, I took a photo of the sunset view from the deck and posted it to my Instagram with the caption, "Let the creative minds retreat begin." #emerging from the shadows. I knew my siblings followed my account. I knew word would spread. And for once, I didn't care. I was done hiding my hurt and pretending their actions didn't affect me. I was stepping into the light. The first guests arrived just before noon the next day. Grace pulled up in her vintage Volvo, followed closely by Troy and his partner David. Their reactions as they entered the property validated every dollar spent and hour invested. "Sarah, this is unbelievable," Grace gasped, taking in the soaring ceilings and lake views. "You've outdone yourself." Throughout the afternoon, the remaining guests trickled in. Some I hadn't seen in years, and our reunions were filled with genuine warmth. Everyone marveled at the property, the welcome baskets, the detailed itinerary I'd created for the week ahead. The energy in the house built with each arrival, creating exactly the atmosphere I'd hoped for: creative, expectant, joyful. Sophia, the chef, arrived with assistants and began preparing our welcome dinner. As I showed guests to their rooms and helped them settle in, by sunset all 22 participants had arrived, including my sister Rachel, who pulled me into a tight hug. "This is incredible," she whispered. "I had no idea you were planning something so amazing. Did anyone else in the family notice my Instagram post?" I asked quietly. Rachel's expression turned slightly uncomfortable. "Mom asked if I knew anything about it. I just said I'd be seeing you this week." I nodded, appreciating her discretion. "Thank you for coming. It means a lot." Our first dinner exceeded all expectations. Sophia served a multi-course meal featuring locally sourced ingredients, each plate a work of art. We dined at a long table on the deck, string lights twinkling overhead, the conversation flowing as freely as the wine. I stood to welcome everyone officially, my heart full as I looked at the faces of people who had chosen to be there, who had made space for me in their lives. To creativity, to connection, and to creating our own traditions, I toasted, raising my glass. As the evening progressed, I noticed guests taking photos and posting them on social media. By morning, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Not just from retreat participants sharing their experiences, but from family members who had suddenly realized what I was doing. The first text came from Michael: "That place looks incredible. What's this retreat thing about?" Then Emma: "Mom's asking why Rachel is with you and not at the family gathering. Just FYI." I chose not to respond immediately, focusing instead on the morning's activities. We began with sunrise yoga on the deck, led by David, who was a certified instructor. After a breakfast of fresh fruit and homemade pastries, Troy led the first group on a photography hike while Miranda set up her pottery wheels on the patio for the remaining guests. Throughout the day, I was too busy and genuinely engaged to check my phone often. But when I did, the messages had multiplied. My brother Matthew had texted: "Saw your posts. Looks amazing. Didn't know you were planning something for this week." The subtext was clear. He was wondering why he hadn't been invited. The most surprising development came on the third day of the retreat. We were returning from a boat tour of the lake when I spotted an elegant older woman waiting on the dock. It took me a moment to recognize my grandmother's sister, Eleanor, after whom I had been named. "Great Aunt Eleanor. What are you doing here?" I exclaimed, helping her to her feet. "I saw photos of this place on that Instagram thing," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "Recognized the view. I was supposed to be at your parents' gathering, but this looked far more interesting." At 84, Great Aunt Eleanor had always been the family rebel, traveling the world as a journalist when most women of her generation were expected to stay home. She had been close to my grandparents and had always shown special interest in my creative pursuits. That evening, Eleanor and I sat on the deck after most guests had retired, sharing a bottle of her favorite scotch. "Your grandparents would be proud of you," she said suddenly. "Not just for this," she gestured at the property, "but for staying true to yourself despite Robert and Linda's disapproval." "You know about that?" I asked, surprised. "Of course I do. I've watched them favor your siblings for years. James and Margaret saw it too. It broke their hearts." The validation from someone who had known and loved my grandparents brought unexpected tears. "I've tried so hard to earn their approval," I admitted. "Some people's approval isn't worth earning," Eleanor said firmly. "Your grandparents understood that creativity isn't just a career choice, it's a way of seeing the world. They saw that in you from the beginning." The conversation with Eleanor centered me, reminding me why I'd created the retreat in the first place. It wasn't about proving something to my parents. It was about honoring the parts of myself they couldn't or wouldn't value. The next day, as we were gathered for lunch, my phone rang with my mother's number. I let it go to voicemail, but she called again immediately. On the third call, I excused myself and answered. "Sarah, where are you?" My mother's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Eleanor was supposed to arrive at the retreat yesterday, but she's not answering her phone." "She's here, Mom. With me." A long silence followed. "What do you mean, with you? Where is here?" "I'm hosting my own retreat this week. Great Aunt Eleanor decided to join us instead." "You're in Tahoe?" The shock in her voice was almost comical. "But we told you there wasn't enough space." "I know exactly what you told me," I interrupted, keeping my voice level. "And I know you invited 118 people and rented additional properties." I decided to make my own space. Another long pause. "We need to talk about this. Your father and I are coming over." Before I could protest, she had hung up. I returned to the group, trying to maintain my composure, but Grace immediately noticed something was wrong. My parents are coming here, I explained quietly. They just found out where I am. Grace squeezed my hand. We've got your back. All of us. An hour later, my parents' Mercedes pulled into the driveway. I met them outside, not wanting to disrupt the workshop currently happening in the great room. My mother looked me up and down, taking in the property behind me with narrowed eyes. What exactly is going on here, Sarah? I'm hosting a creative retreat for friends and colleagues, I replied calmly. Since I wasn't welcome at the family gathering, I made alternative plans. Not welcome? My father's face reddened. We simply said there wasn't enough space. For one person, I finished for him, while you invited 118 others and rented extra properties. Let's not pretend this was about space, Dad. My mother's expression flickered between anger and embarrassment. We thought you'd be busy with work. You're always so focused on your projects. My projects are my career, Mom. A successful career. That you and Dad have never acknowledged. The words I'd held back for years finally emerged. Not in an emotional outburst, but as stated facts. You've excluded me from family events for 3 years running. You've diminished my accomplishments while celebrating my siblings. You've made it clear where I stand in the family hierarchy. My father started to speak, then stopped, looking past me at the house. Through the windows, the retreat participants were visible, engaged in Miranda's clay workshop, laughing and creating together. Who are all these people? He asked. People who value me, I said simply. Friends, colleagues, clients. People who make space for me in their lives. And Rachel's here too, I added, watching their expressions shift. She chose to come to my retreat instead of yours. My mother's face crumpled slightly at this news. Sarah, if you felt excluded, you should have said something. Would it have made a difference? I asked quietly. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father at a loss for words. He looked around at the magnificent property, taking in what I had organized, what I had created from their rejection. Perhaps we should talk about this privately, he finally said. No, I replied firmly. I'm hosting an event. My guests deserve my attention. If you'd like to join us for dinner tonight, you're welcome to. As guests, not as parents coming to reprimand their child. They exchanged glances, clearly unused to this version of me, confident, established, setting boundaries. Dinner is at 7, I added, then turned to go back inside. Sarah, my father called after me. I paused but didn't turn around. This is impressive. What you've done here. It wasn't an apology, but coming from Robert Mitchell, it was significant. I nodded once and continued into the house, where my chosen family waited. What happened at that dinner would change the trajectory of our family forever, and force my parents to confront a truth they'd been avoiding for years. My parents did come to dinner that night. They were stiff and uncomfortable at first, but Great Aunt Eleanor's presence helped ease the tension. They met my friends, heard about my professional accomplishments from others' perspectives, and witnessed firsthand the respect I commanded in my world. By the end of the evening, something had shifted. Not dramatically, but perceptibly. As they were leaving, my mother said, next year, we'll make sure there's space for you at the family retreat. I smiled politely but made no promises. I had created something too valuable to abandon. Over the next 2 days, texts trickled in from my siblings. Reactions were mixed. Matthew seemed offended he wasn't invited, while Claire was simply confused. Emma was defensive of our parents, while David sent a thoughtful message acknowledging that the family hadn't always been fair to me. The most surprising response came from Michael, who showed up unannounced on our last full day. I told Mom and Dad I needed a break from the chaos, he explained, but really, I wanted to see what you've created here. It looks amazing online. I gave him a tour, introduced him to my friends, and invited him to join our closing dinner. Watching him engage with my creative friends, I saw glimpses of the curious boy he'd been before our parents' expectations had narrowed his path. As the retreat neared its end, the success was undeniable. Participants were already asking about next year. Professional connections had formed that would lead to collaborations. And I had proven to myself, most of all, that I could create meaningful traditions on my own terms. The final morning of the retreat arrived with a bittersweet quality. As guests enjoyed a leisurely breakfast on the deck, I noticed a familiar SUV pulling into the driveway. My parents had returned, this time with my sister Emma in tow. I excused myself and met them outside, determined to maintain the boundaries I'd established. We thought we'd help you pack up, my mother offered, her attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That's not necessary, I replied. We have everything handled. Emma stepped forward. Sarah, can we talk privately? I hesitated, then nodded, leading them to a secluded corner of the property's garden. The morning sun filtered through the pines, creating dappled shadows on the ground between us. "This has gotten out of hand," Emma began. "You've made Mom and Dad feel terrible." "That wasn't my intention," I said honestly. "I simply decided to stop accepting exclusion as my due." "There was a misunderstanding about space," my mother started. "Mom," I interrupted gently but firmly, "we both know it wasn't about space. It's never been about space." My father, unusually quiet, finally spoke. "You're right." The simple admission hung in the air between us. My mother looked at him in surprise. "You're right," he repeated, meeting my eyes directly. "We've favored your siblings. We've dismissed your career. We've excluded you because we've been disappointed that you didn't follow the path we wanted for you." His honesty, however painful, was refreshing. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I said. "But this," he gestured toward the house, "this event you've created, with these successful people who clearly respect you, it's made me realize we've been wrong." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "We didn't understand your world, Sarah. It seemed so unstable compared to what your siblings chose." "You never tried to understand," I pointed out. "You never came to my gallery showings or asked about my clients or celebrated my achievements." "You're right about that too," my father admitted. "And he stumbled over the words, "I'm sorry." Coming from Robert Mitchell, those words were as rare as snow in July. I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "I can't promise things will change overnight," he continued, "but I'd like to try to understand your world better." Emma looked between us, clearly uncomfortable with our father's uncharacteristic vulnerability. "So will you come to the family retreat next year?" she asked, attempting to move past the emotional moment. I considered her question carefully. "I'm not sure. I might host my own retreat again. It's been healing." "Perhaps we could coordinate the dates," my mother suggested, "so they don't conflict. You could attend both, or at least part of each." It was a small olive branch, but a genuine one. "I'd consider that," I replied. At that moment, Grace appeared at the garden entrance. "Sorry to interrupt, but we're ready for the closing circle whenever you are." "I'll be right there," I told her, then turned back to my family. "You're welcome to join us for our closing ceremony if you'd like. As participants, not observers." To my surprise, my father nodded. "We'd like that." As we walked back to the house, Emma whispered, "Michael hasn't stopped talking about yesterday. He said it was the most relaxed he's felt in years." The closing circle was a tradition I'd borrowed from my art school days, a chance for participants to share reflections on their experience. We gathered in the great room, sitting on cushions. In a circle, each person taking turns to speak. When it came to my parents' turn, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm not much for public speaking unless it's about quarterly projections," he began, eliciting gentle laughter. "But I want to thank Sarah for allowing us to be part of this. It's opened my eyes to a world I didn't understand before." After the ceremony, as guests began to pack and exchange contact information, my parents pulled me aside. "We'd like you to come to dinner next week," my mother said. "Just us? To talk more?" I agreed, but added, "I need you to understand something. I'm not going to change who I am or what I do to earn your approval. That's not on the table." "We know," my father said, surprising me again. "Maybe it's we who need to change." After they left, I rejoined my guests for our final lunch. Great Aunt Eleanor sat beside me, her eyes twinkling with mischief and wisdom. "You know," she said, taking a sip of her iced tea, "sometimes the family you create is more important than the family you're born into." I looked around at the table filled with people who had chosen to spend a week supporting and celebrating each other. "I think you're right. But," she added, patting my hand, "it's nice when both can coexist. Give them a chance, Sarah. Not for their sake, but for yours." As guests departed throughout the afternoon, the house grew quieter. Rachel was among the last to leave, pulling me into a tight hug. "This was transformative," she said. "I've been so caught up in meeting Mom and Dad's expectations that I forgot what it feels like to just create, to play, to connect authentically." "You're welcome at my table anytime," I told her. Michael had extended his impromptu visit and helped load the last of the supplies into my car. As we closed up the house, he said, "I'm sorry, Sarah." "For what?" "For not seeing what was happening to you. For going along with it." I looked at my brother, really looked at him. And saw not the corporate lawyer our parents had molded, but the boy who used to build elaborate sandcastles with me at the lake. "Maybe we can all do better moving forward," I suggested. By sunset, I was alone on the deck of Emerald Bay Estate, watching the golden light fade from the water. The retreat had been a success beyond my expectations. Not just professionally or socially, but personally. I had transformed exclusion into inclusion, rejection into creation, hurt into healing. I didn't know what would happen with my family moving forward. Decades of patterns couldn't be undone in a single weekend. But for the first time in years, there seemed to be an opening. A willingness to see me as I was, not as they wished I would be. As I locked the door of the property for the final time, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For my grandparents, who had recognized my creative spirit. For friends who had supported my vision. And even for the exclusion that had forced me to create something uniquely mine. Whatever happened next, I knew this truth: I would never again make myself smaller to fit into spaces too narrow to hold all of who I was. Sometimes the most powerful response to being told there isn't enough space for you is to create a space so magnificent that others long to be included in it. A space built not from resentment, but from self-worth. Not from competition, but from abundance. I had done exactly that. And in doing so, I had not only changed my family's perception of me, I had transformed my perception of myself. Have you ever been excluded from family events or made to feel like the black sheep? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and empowerment. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is the one that truly sees us. Share this with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you for watching, and remember, your worth isn't determined by those who can't see it, but by your courage to honor it anyway.